Welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk here at Black Hat USA. Joining us now is Nico Papez, Senior Manager, Cybersecurity Strategy with Menlo Security. Nico, welcome to the Dark Reading News Desk.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
We are talking about how hybrid work is throttling the threat landscape. Tell me it isn't so.
It's throttling it quite a bit since what we've seen over the last couple of years.
I dare say.
Yeah.
The attack surface has obviously expanded exponentially. But the threat landscape, regardless of pandemics, is always evolving. So what's unique about what's happening today?
Yeah, I think, we've seen a crazy evolution, especially over the last couple of years, like I just mentioned, with the COVID-19 pandemic. The whole idea behind, this adoption of cloud transformation and this digital transformation, this buzzword going around, but really, bringing all of our data to the cloud and figuring out ways of how do we secure that information when it gets to that cloud environment. I mean, we're all of our users, our data, our applications are moving to the cloud, so it's really become problematic for a lot of security teams to understand how do we provide the requisite level of security needed to ensure that our users are safe and that data is protected. Secondly, I think with the increase in remote workforces today in these hybrid environments, it's really brought a lot of challenges to teams of how to properly protect those organizations, because people are collaborating with one another. They may not know who they're working with on what projects or the data they need, but everyone needs to still be able to. Business still needs to move forward, data still needs to be accessed and shared among these teams, and so it's really become challenging with these kind of two quick momentums coming into play and changing that environment for the threat landscape.
Are companies being smart? Are users being dumb? Like, where are the vectors that really have changed the equation here?
Yeah, I think really it falls kind of within that web browsers where we're seeing a lot of these new attack vectors surface. I mean, according to Google, 75% of a user's working day is spent inside of the browser, and so that leads to this online exposure leads to these web browsers constantly needing to be updated. I mean, we're seeing SaaS applications expanding that attack surface, and like I said, the amount of data that's needed to protect it has really multiplied, over these last several years, and with all this transferring data to the cloud. So
I mean, it makes sense with so much of our work being done either via SaaS or some form of cloud computing that is reliant on browsers.
Yeah.
I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the browser is this point of focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are security teams doing to adapt to all this?
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are really starting to look towards things like SASE frameworks, where we figure out how do we securely bring connectivity and security closer together, and understanding what that means. Things like zero trust. How do we enable access to only the applications or the data that users need? With all these different frameworks and things people are looking towards, it really comes down to also at the same time implementing the right level of technology. I think we still see all these threats happening. We still see all these breaches, and I think a lot of companies today are investing into these detection and response type solutions. They're investing in backup and recovery type solutions. But really, I think we need to start looking at where we're investing our technology and start to try to couple our existing security tool sets with things like preventative technology, things like isolation that can help prevent these types of threats, these evasive threats from gaining foothold into the organization and creating damage.
So thanks for mentioning one of the acronyms of the day, SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge. There's another acronym that's entering the lexicon, HEAT, H-E-A-T.
Yes.
Talk about what HEAT attacks are and how they differ from other cyber threats.
Yeah, HEAT stands for highly evasive adaptive threats. It's a class of cyber threats that employs various techniques that are designed to bypass our legacy detection stacks or our legacy SWIGs. Things like evading file content inspection, which, think about it, traditional security tools are designed to look for known malware signatures or scan remote file executions or file requests. These evasive threats are leveraging things like dynamic file downloads, like HTML smuggling, or things like password protective archive files to essentially smuggle that data past these content filters and download that malicious content to the endpoint and be able to do all this without any user interaction. There's also things or characteristics that these heat attacks are leveraging, things like, evading website or web categorization engines. The whole idea behind of, these bad actors compromising benign-looking or poorly protected websites that will then turn around and use those to serve that malicious content. And so we're seeing a variety of different techniques employed through these heat attacks that these adversaries are leveraging to bypass our existing tool sets today.
And are users working from home or other kinds of remote users more subject to these kinds of attacks, or is it more systemic?
It's both, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing these heat attacks being leveraged by adversaries going after both kind of the corporate environments, the branch offices, these especially the remote workforce, right? Because they're ill-equipped to know what to look for, how to handle these, and these evasive, no matter what technology we're putting in place, these heat attacks are designed to evade all these controls we've been implementing and using for a decade now. And so, adversaries know this, and they're really trying to find workaways to leverage these heat attacks to gain that initial foothold into the organization and really launch their attack from there.
Is there a signature or a footprint? I mean, how can organizations know if they're either being subject to a heat attack or have been already a victim of one?
So yeah, unfortunately, it's not until you're eventually, that patient zero, right? We don't know that heat attacks are leveraging these, because at the end of the day, these heat attacks are designed to bypass our standard proxies. They're designed to evade our firewalls. And so, incorporating preventative solutions like isolation really is the only way we're going to be able to kind of help prevent these types of heat attacks from entering our organization and preventing that initial foothold from infecting our endpoints.
So give us a little bit of hope here.
Yeah.
What can organizations do?
Yeah, I think the best way to start is really, it's not a matter of, looking to replace certain things. It's how do we start to look to couple our existing tool sets, everything we've invested in, all of our detection capabilities. How do we couple that with preventative technology? Like I said, things like advanced anti-phishing solutions, advanced isolation capabilities. How do we start to do that? Menlo Security actually had come out with a heat check. It's a heat security assessment toolkit that allows customers to identify and see if they are susceptible to these real-world heat attacks that we see, and it'll allow them to look within their networks and see if they have any heat exposure within those current environments. So those are definitely some places I'd look to start at, identifying those gaps and using tools like these heat checks provided by Menlo to help identify and see if they are susceptible to these heat attacks.
Any other advice you might have for customer organizations that are looking at if this approach is right for them? Like, where might they start to begin to unravel this?
Yeah, I think the first approach is, identifying, trying to look at what you have currently in place, looking at your existing tool sets, figuring out where there may be potential gaps, and how do we incorporate additional layers of technology. Everyone always talks about a defense in depth type strategy, so it's really looking at where are our gaps, what type of preventative technology can we help supplement or augment to those existing tool sets, and looking to things like these heat check tools provided by Menlo is all a great start to kind of focus on and gear their efforts towards.
You had mentioned Secure Access Service Edge, SASE, a few minutes ago. Wondering if is that part of the equation here, or does it have deficiencies that don't really address the root of the problem?
I think it's a great place to start and look at. Like I mentioned, how do we provide that secure access to all these private applications, SaaS applications that are all over, and providing that right level of security. It's definitely a framework you want to kind of gear towards and look and feed into. It's somewhere I'd start, that people, taking that approach, the SASE approach, the SSE approach, looking at enabling zero trust. It's identifying where your gaps are, kind of what strategy do you want to take, and leaning towards there. So.
Right. So we're here at Black Hat USA after a small break from the pandemic the last year or so. Anything that you've seen that's surprised you or maybe changed your thinking around a particular topic?
I think the biggest thing that's we've seen change is really ransomware today, in the sense of, ransomware has become incredibly easy to execute, due to things like digital currencies like crypto that have made it extremely easy for these bad actors to hide their identities and collect ransoms. And so back to my point, when you look at the anatomy of a ransomware attack, it's about preventing that initial malware incursion. How do we stop that additional compromise from affecting other machines and prevent extortion? Well, if you think about it, if we use preventative technology that can stop that initial infection, that can prevent that malware incursion, then we can prevent everything that follows, right? We can prevent that initial access, make it as if it never happened. Then we can minimize alerts, we can stop additional account compromises, and we can ultimately protect the endpoints.
Well, Nico, if I can summarize, the heat is on. So I appreciate you joining us today
Absolutely.
for the Dark Reading News Desk.
Thanks
for
Terry.
stopping by.
Yep, thank you.
We've been talking with Nico Papez of Menlo Security. This is the Dark Reading News Desk here at Black Hat USA.